Chopin's Ballade No. 1 is amongst some of the most famous piano pieces that there is, and it's often a piece that many people aspire to learn. The piece of music is pretty much the first of its kind and inspired a lot of other ballades that came after it, including Chopin's other 3 ballades, all of which are incredibly famous. But like pretty much any piece, it can be played in lots of different ways. But which is the right way? Well, hopefully today we're going to find out, because today we're going to listen to 4 pianists playing the exact same piece. And first up we have Krystian Zimerman, and Krystian Zimerman actually won the Chopin piano competition at 18 years old back in 1975. His version is the most famous recording of the piece. Very interesting. So when I was learning this piece, I listened to this recording a lot, so it feels very familiar to me. But what's interesting to me is he takes that first note with quite a lot of attack, before then kind of climbing up more tentatively through those other notes. And taking time to navigate around those notes. And then also, towards the end of that introduction, he makes that top note really sing out above the chords. So let's see how that compares to the other 3. Now, the next performer that we have is Aimi Kobayashi, and she is known now as somewhat of a Chopin specialist. She was a finalist in the Chopin piano competition in 2015, and then in 2021 went on to win it. But she is also the youngest of the 4 performances we're going to watch, because at the time of this recording, she was just 19. Wow, okay, so quite different. In Aimi's version of this, she very much kind of powers through that first section of this, and she also keeps the pedal held down much more so than Zimerman did. So you kind of get this big wash of sound. By doing that, you kind of allow yourself to have a bigger range of emotions. You kind of make it feel bigger so that when you play smaller, it feels even smaller. That is actually one of the biggest differences between modern players and historic performances of pieces. In historic performances of pieces, they tend to be much more reserved. Players like Horowitz, Zimerman, Brendel, they all have kind of a much more reserved color palette compared to more modern players who are a bit more out there with their performance. She also spread the chord that's at the end of the introduction over quite a long period of time, which is a really interesting interpretation because it almost feels more so like it's going to turn a corner into something else. Okay, next up we have Yuja Wang. Now, Yuja Wang is not particularly known as a Chopin specialist, but she is probably one of the most famous out of the 4 pianists because she's known for being very virtuosic, having a wide range of pieces, and she performs everywhere all the time. And I think one of the main reasons why she's so famous is because she manages to be so expressive in her playing. But it'd be interesting to compare her performance to those that are known as Chopin specialists. Very interesting. So I actually think Yuja plays it much closer to how I would be more tempted to play it, which is somewhat of that middle point where it does need to feel authoritative, but also you can keep pushing through the music without dragging moments out too much. Having said that, at the end of the phrase, here, She did wait a very long time on this particular note before moving on to the next section, which I think does create a sense of suspense before turning that corner into the new section. Okay, and then the final player to introduce is a player called Seong-Jin Cho. And Seong-Jin Cho is interesting because he won the Chopin piano competition back in 2015, which is the year that Aimi Kobayashi was a finalist. So he kind of bridges this gap where he's not like Zimerman, who is a classic performer, but he's also been playing for many, many years, and he is a Chopin specialist. Wow, okay, so that was by far the most different compared to the other three performers. He really dragged it out to try and get the most out of each of those notes. And interestingly, on this final section, he kind of did this to try and get more of an accent on that note, which is interesting because it changes the quality of the note altogether. You kind of get a more dinging sound, opposed to the other performers, who made it feel more like it was turning a corner, rather than that itself was a moment. Okay, so for this section of the music, we kind of get this more dancey kind of vibe to the piece. And that is because we're kind of constantly getting these two notes, which create that kind of down, up, up feeling that makes it feel like a dance. Now, this particular section of the piece of music is largely characterized by the melody at the time, because typically in this type of piece, your dynamics and your rubato, so your slowing down and stretching of the music, is kind of determined by what's happening in the melody and the phrasing of the piece of music. So it would be unusual to play this all very regimented. You'd kind of take out all of the emotion that's there, and this is where the performers are going to differ the most, because it's about how much you stretch up to those top notes and take time when you are resolving those notes. And these are kind of the things in pieces like this that aren't explicitly told to you in the piece of music itself, and you have to make decisions based on what you think the piece of music is trying to convey at that particular moment. And no doubt we'll see each of the performers do this very slightly differently. Over the past few years, more and more people are trying to learn the piano by themselves. But learning the piano can be quite difficult when you have no feedback, no guidance, and you don't know what to do next. Which is why I started a community called The Practice Room. The Practice Room is a community where you can share your progress, get direct feedback from me and other learners. You can ask questions and get access to exclusive resources, such as a database full of pieces with exactly how difficult those pieces are and what exactly you are going to get out of learning that piece of music. There is also a series of music theory articles that feature in these videos all the time called Piano Practice Daily. These articles explain complex music theory concepts in a concise, digestible way. And there is also a practice log, so you can link pieces directly from the database into your actual practice, and you can see statistics like how long you've practiced the piano this year, or how much time you spent practicing sight reading versus learning pieces. So if you are someone who is looking to improve your piano playing alongside other people who are doing exactly the same, then check out the Practice Room with the link in the description. Okay, back to the video. Wow, really fascinating. Because to me, Aimi's version of this sounds completely different. It has a completely different set of emotions that are associated with it. Whereas in Zimerman's performance, it was much more dancey and sort of pressing. With this kind of singing melody over the top. In Aimi's version, it sounds much more sad, more almost hollow in a sense. And that's just because she's taking slightly longer. She's taking longer to resolve those melody notes. And she's also making it feel slightly more isolated by making it almost quieter. Now, Yuja, once again, to me, has this kind of almost directly in the middle of Zimerman and Kobayashi. She plays it with that sentimental feeling. But she's also not trying too hard to make it really sad, which means that she retains some of that kind of dancey quality. And that also allows her to really express those moments where the pitch goes up. For example, this section here. Which I personally really like because it makes it feel like there's a moment in the music that's kind of breathless. It makes you kind of stop for a moment to listen to those notes as they stretch up to the top. Okay, so surprisingly, even though Cho's introduction was much more different to the others, I think this first section is much less different than the others. Although what I will say is that he does make that melody have a much more attacking quality of sound. He has this kind of quality of sound, opposed to a much softer kind of attack. It means that the melody does much more clearly sit above the harmony and the chords that are underneath. But at the same time, does that mean that the melody loses some of its sensitivity? Or does it need to have that level of sensitivity at all? Okay, very interesting. Now, I think out of the entire piece, this is actually my favourite part of it because the chords kind of land so nicely in certain places. For example, here. It really feels like the music is moving somewhere and like it's kind of landing somewhere, which is really nice. Once again, to me, Zimerman is kind of like the gold standard of this performance, in the sense that when I think of Chopin Ballade, I think of how Zimerman would shape this piece as kind of like the default. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right way or the wrong way of doing it. And of course, this particular section has this fast run of notes, which he'd slowed down in the middle of, which is really interesting, because then he managed to kind of flow to the end of the phrase. Almost like you're kind of on a roller coaster, and in the middle of it, you're at the peak before you end up falling down again. So once again, to me, Kobayashi has this much more sentimental sound to the music, and you actually see it with the expression on her face. She's moving through it almost like she doesn't have the energy to be angry about anything, kind of. Everything sounds a little bit more passive, and as if she's kind of submitted in a way. You get the same with this section. She almost sliced through that like butter, like there was no problem at all, and she was just, you know, it's just part of the emotional journey. It's a very different approach to Zimerman, where he makes things feel more intentional, rather than making things feel more like an emotional choice. Wow, okay, so this is interesting because having just listened to Kobayashi's version of it, Yuja Wang plays this very differently. She plays it with much more presence, which makes the resolution at the end of the section feel much more like it lands on that G. And that's not to say Kobayashi or Zimmerman's didn't feel like it landed on the G. It definitely did. But this almost feels like the end of the piece, whereas theirs felt like the end of a section leading on to something else. This is why I think Yuja Wang is such a well-known pianist, even to people who aren't deeply looking at the music, because she makes these kind of pieces really emotionally accessible, and people can feel where that resolution is, even if they don't really understand what's happening in the music. She kind of points these moments out for you. Wow, okay, so that was very interesting. I actually think by far, out of the four of those, for that section, that was my favourite. And the reason for that is because I think what I'm noticing about Cho's playing is that, kind of along with Kobayashi as well, they're really expressing how they feel about the piece in particular. They are, of course, doing everything that they're supposed to do to make this piece accurate, but they're layering on top of that their own personal feelings about how the music is supposed to be expressed. And Cho did the same thing as Zimerman, actually, where he kind of slowed down in the middle of that run of notes so that it felt like more of a roller coaster, kind of falling down again. But he was really taking moments, and in this section, I think this needs that. You almost need to feel the pain in this falling to this. And I think Cho expressed that really nicely. So this section of the music is really quite turbulent, and it's really interesting how this contrasts the previous sections. If the player has decided to play the first sections in a much more sentimental way, this is an opportunity to kind of really go for it and show some real contrast. And interestingly, this piece was written when Chopin was exiled from Poland and he was living in Paris. And it was actually at a moment in his life when he wrote this piece where he was kind of dealing with the loss of something that's irretrievable. He was never going to be able to go home. And this is why I think this piece is so powerful, because you kind of get beauty in the music, but you also get like sorrowful and sadness, and then you get turbulence and like outcrying. And this is exactly one of those moments where there's like an outcry of like fast, furious notes. And once again, to me, when I think of this piece, this tends to be the characterization that I hear in my head. I do like, actually, the fact that Zimerman takes slower moments reaching up to the top sometimes of those arpeggio patterns. So you get moments like that where it's kind of slowing down to reach the peak of the phrase. You also get it at moments like this. Places like that where he's just kind of taking time to turn the corner at the top of the music. It's really nice. So Kobayashi did take the opportunity to kind of contrast it a lot from what she was playing before, and I really like that. Because she played the first section with such sentimental value, it kind of made the turbulence of this section sound even more. And those fast arpeggios, they sounded incredibly emotionally impactful and furious because before it was so calm and still. It's really hard to put my finger on it, but Yuja Wang's performances is just so emotionally visible. Like, she plays it in such a way where it becomes so obvious what it's supposed to feel like in the way that she's performing it. And I think it's just that she really leans into the effect she's trying to have. If she's trying to make it sound furious, she will push the tempo slightly more than anyone else. And she'll make it louder slightly more than anyone else, and those kind of things, in order to make sure that the audience really feel the impact of the section that she's playing. So it's interesting. I can completely understand from a Chopin piano competition perspective where the music lives in the nuances, right? Based on very small things, you can really differentiate two different characters that emerge from the same piece of music, as we can hear between each of the players that are playing here. And when you are playing in a Chopin piano competition, obviously they're going to be listening for those small details like that. Whereas for someone like Yuja Wang, who is just a world-renowned international pianist, who doesn't specifically specialize in Chopin, she's really just trying to convey the best performance she can so that people can really understand the piece of music. And I think she does an exceptional job at that. So Cho's version of this section is interesting because his right hand, once again, similar to the beginning, he has a really crisp attack with his melody notes, so you can hear the articulation of every single one of the notes in those fast runs. With the other versions of this piece, you were kind of getting a wash of sound, and it was creating like a furious bubble, whereas in this case, it's really like the notes are kind of leading the charge on the furiosity, if furiosity is a word. But it's almost like a boat in water, where the ripple effect is behind the boat itself, and the thing that you see is the tip of the boat. Whereas in the other performances, it's like a mirage. You get this kind of like big wash of sound. It's very interesting, because usually when I do one of these types of videos where there's 4 performers playing, for me, there's an obvious one that I prefer, and it's usually for specific reasons, like the way they shape the music or something like that. Where in this particular case, I actually like certain parts of each of them. I like the reliability and the intention of Krystian Zimerman's version. I like the emotional quality of Kobayashi's version. I like the obviousness of Yuja Wang's version, and I like the crispness and the willingness for him to play it in his own way in Cho's version. But let me know which one you prefer in the comments, and if you want to see me compare 3 pianists playing Chopin's Prelude in E minor, then head on through, and I will see you there.